Krishna. Welcome back to our study of the Yoga Sutras. Today we're going to discuss Sutras number 30 and 31. So we have come a long way in our study of the book. Very quickly, if you remember, we began with the main statement of chapter number 1, the Samadhi Pada, Yoga Chitta-vritti Nirodha, which was a defining statement. And after that, we discussed what is that Nirodha, what happens if I indeed control my mind. So Patanjali spent 2 sutras explaining the concept of what and what if not. And then we studied from sutras 5 to 11, we studied what are these 5 kinds of vrittis. And post that, we studied the concept of abhyasa and vairagya, practice and detachment. And based on this practice and detachment, Patanjali gave us the process of involution, of how we slowly peel off those material layers and start to go inwards. And in the process of going inwards, he explained to us the concepts of sampragnata samadhi and asampragnata samadhi. And after that, we studied what are those favorable virtues, what is the good qualities that are needed for somebody to attain that state of samadhi. And then we spent the last few sutras understanding in detail the concept of Ishvara pranidhanatva. If not this, this hard effort of attaining samadhi, the other way of attaining that state of samadhi is also through Ishvara pranidhana, or surrender to Ishvara, or this kind of profound devotional meditation upon Ishvara. And in the immediate previous 2 sutras, we studied how to relate with the concept of Ishvara. How do I realize Ishvara as Pranava, the Omkara, the sacred syllable Om? And finally, how do I realize that Ishvara by the process of japa, or repeated chanting of his names, right? And if you remember, we ended the previous session with a sutra where Patanjali says that why this Ishvara pranidhana, why this surrender to the Lord, it helps in removing the obstacles, right? So while he mentioned this aspect of removal of obstacles, he did not exactly state what are the obstacles, what are those challenges that a seeker in this journey of yoga faces. So in these 2 sutras, today's 2 sutras, 30 and 31, Patanjali is going to very specifically highlight what are those challenges that any practitioner, either from a beginner stage to a very advanced stage, what are those challenges that a practitioner faces in their journey of yoga, right? And let's see, it's not just 1 or 2. He lists a whole, long series of challenges, right? This is how the sutra goes. So he talks about vyadhi, sthana, samshaya, pramada, alasa, avirati, bhranti darshana, alabdha bhumiktva, and anavasthitva. So we'll actually take up each of those, right? Let me first read the translation first. He says, disease, idleness, doubt, carelessness, laziness, sensuality, false perception, failure to reach firm ground, and slipping from the ground already gained. These distractions of the chitta are the obstacles, chitta vikshepas, or the obstacles for the chitta. Now, though we have some translations, but they did not fully capture what exactly Patanjali wanted to point out. Especially, this is one sutra upon which different classical commentators have elaborated, wonderful insights, because they are giving these insights to help beginners like you and me to actually understand their inner challenges, right? Can you just imagine? Here is someone, hundreds of years ago, could guess what are the challenges that in the 21st century, in the 22nd century, what are the challenges that some random practitioner of yoga in some random part of the world will face, right? They could actually predict that. So this is very interesting, right? And it also goes on to show that despite whatever social, cultural, technological advancement we have achieved, the fundamental nature of the human mind has not changed. Therefore, the problems associated with that mind also have not changed. And also, therefore, the solutions that books like Yoga Sutras and Bhagavad Gita offer will always be relevant, irrespective of which phase of time and technological advancement that we live in, right? So with that, let us actually understand in detail what are these challenges, right? So Patanjali, in this list, is going to give us around 9 challenges. So let's actually see one by one. Vyadhi, as means disease. As the word itself indicates, dis-ease. Now, this happens on a physical plane when the physical body is not in a state of ease. That state is called dis-ease, right? Now, what do I mean by this dis-ease? What is not at ease? So the Ayurvedic science explains that the human body or the internal state of the human body can be explained by the balance of three doshas, or three fundamental elements, right, so to speak. So these are called kapha, vata, and pitta. In English, you can call them as mucus, bile, and wind. So all the bodily functions in our body are basically a combination or a balance of these three internal elements of kapha, vata, and pitta. So the acharyas explain that what we call as dis-ease, whether it be common cold to even like COVID, right? So all of them can be identified as an imbalance in these three internal humors, these internal things which are flowing in your body, just kapha, vata, and pitta, bile, mucus, and wind. So that is how these three doshas are what that cause the state of disease. And sthana means idleness. Idleness, specifically, it is described among these three elements. When the kapha means mucus, when there is excessive mucus in the body becomes a little lazy, it becomes a little idle, lethargic, too much of inertia, because that mucus is the earth element in our body. So when there's excessive of that earth element, right, it is not that these elements are bad, but they should always be in a state of balance. Too much of anything or too little of anything creates an imbalance. So the body needs to always kept in a fine balance. So when there is too much of kapha in the body, it leads to physical lethargy, which is what he calls as dhyana or idleness. So when sometimes you would have felt that you just didn't feel like getting out of the bed that day, because especially happens in when you have a heavy cold, when there's too much of mucus in your system, right? You just don't feel like getting off your bed. You just want to just curl in your bed and roll a blanket over you and sleep, right? So that is the effect of the kapha in the body, or the mucus in the body, right? Then he talks about samshaya, right? These are doubts, these are mental doubts, ambiguities, right, about what is right, what is wrong. Basically these are where the mind is always fluctuating between two options, right? It's not doubt. Samshaya is not lack of understanding, that is coming up at a later point, but sometimes we are stuck between two options. That state of ambiguity is what is called as doubt. Like, will yoga work or not? Will this asana work for me or not? Should I do this or not? Right? That sense of ambiguity that the mind has, that fickle nature, that is what is samshaya is, right? Interestingly, this is also connected to one of those elements that I spoke about. Too much of vata, too much of wind makes you very indecisive. So this doubts and indecision, right, is also one of the challenges that a yogic seeker faces. Then he calls us pramada. Pramada, carelessness, is like overconfidence, right? While in samshaya you are always in doubt, trying to choose between two options, right? In pramada, you are so confident that you don't even want to look where you are stepping, right? That is the other end of the spectrum, right? So the pramada is also another obstacle that we need to be very watchful of. Then again, he talks about alasya. Alasya may sound like sthana. It's called laziness, and idleness may sound similar, but Patanjali maintains a very distinct usage of these two terms, right? By laziness here, he is not meaning physical laziness, but mental laziness that is translating onto a physical plane. Sometimes it is not that the body is idle. The body wants to do things, right? The body is quite fit. It is not that there's too much of kapha in the body, right? But this is a state where your mind doesn't want to move your body, right? So here the idleness is coming not because of a physical inertia, but because of a mental inertia. We call it a starting trouble. Sometimes you just don't want to get started. You plan things out, everything is set, you kind of did some preparations the day before perhaps, but on the day of some activity that you want to do, your mind doesn't feel like getting involved in that action, right? That is also another kind of a challenge that a yogi faces in his or her life, right? Then avirati here means lack of detachment, and that lack of detachment leads to too much of indulgence in gratifying one's senses. Your sensuality here means where one is longing too much and indulging too much into their cravings, and that is a great distraction. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita also, it is said that for someone who's too much indulging into their cravings, the steadiness of their yogic practice cannot be established. Right? Because every time you want to do something, your cravings will keep calling you. Let me go and check what this latest notification is. Let me go and check if my friend has replied to my post on social media. No, let me go and check, if this so and so, what is the score of some sporting event that I'm trying to follow. Because our cravings, because we have trained our mind to seek those little spikes of pleasure from these so-called worldly activities, right? So then every time you want to do something serious, the mind always wants to go back because it is looking for some quick gratification. That is what this avirati means. And that also becomes a big obstacle in one's yogic journey, right? Then he talks about Bhranti Darshana. Bhranti Darshana, here we use the term false perceptions or illusion, meaning that, right? So this is the other aspect of, if you remember, samshaya or doubt, I said was ambiguity between two options, but not understanding things in real. That is what Bhranti Darshana or illusion or false perception means. So where, if you remember, we discussed this when we discussed the Pramana, Pramaya, when the 5 kind of chittavrittis were discussed, right in the beginning of this chapter. There we spoke about these false perceptions or incorrect perceptions. So this is also another, which means one, even though one is trying to apply in one's yogic practice, one is not able to see the results rightly. So that also becomes like a blockage in one's spiritual journey, right? So then this many of us will relate with alabdha bhumiktva. Alabdha means inability to gain something. Bhumiktva means some kind of a steadiness, some firm ground. So failure to reach a firm ground, right, where we are making so many attempts, but we are just not able to match the right standard. Despite our abhyasa, despite our repeated practice over and over and over again, we are still not able to reach that desired goal that we have set for ourselves, right? Now, the acharyas explain that why this actually happens. It is basically because of lack of that ekagrata. Ekagrata here means concentration. Because of lack of that inner concentration, we are not able to reach that firm ground. Or sometimes we may even reach a particular steady practice. Like for example, you may set yourself a goal that, okay, I want to do 20 Surya Namaskaras every day. And after some a few days of practice or a few weeks of practice, you come to that particular standard. But then after reaching there, again you start to slip, right? So this is anavastitva, where you're slipping down from the place where you have gained, right? So, and this is something very common because in this modern age, if you are not, if you remember last time I gave the example of how spiritual journey is like going uphill. So if the moment you reduce your effort, you start sliding down. And that is exactly what happens in our spiritual journey as well, right? Where if we are not consistent with our efforts, so this lack of consistency in our efforts is the reason for this, where you slip down from the ground you have already gained. So like that. So this also, internally, it may reflect in terms of our inability to focus. Externally, it may represent come up as our inability to to engage in our daily actions, our daily practices, and so on. So all these challenges that obstacles that Patanjali talks about, he says, what do? They cause chitta vikshepa. These are the mental distractions. Vikshepa means distractions. We're going to talk about this in the next sutra also, right? And they cause these obstacles or antarayas. Antarayas are interruptions or something that breaks the flow of something is called antaraya. So these are the obstacles that cause the break in the flow of our spiritual practices, our yogic practices, right? So these are all very, very practical things that we all face in our daily life. Now, many times what happens is when you are going through an obstacle, you may not immediately identify it, right? In fact, many times we realize our shortcomings only in retrospect. After few months have passed, or maybe perhaps after a few years have passed, we realize, maybe at that point in my life I was going through this particular phase. Because while you are in that phase, you may not realize that. So as a measure, if some of these you may not even know that you're actually going through this. Maybe you may not realize that you're actually lazy. Maybe you may not realize that you're careless, right? So how do I know? Is there some external parameter by which I can know? Yes, Patanjali will point that out also, right? So if you look at this list of all these obstacles that we saw, we can broadly classify them, right? We can all these 9 obstacles that we saw, we can broadly classify them into physical, mental, intellectual, and spiritual categories. The first 2, disease and idleness, manifests on a physical plane, right? A lot on the mental plane, doubts, carelessness, laziness, sensuality, right? They all are challenges at a mental plane. The incorrect understanding, the false perceptions happen at an intellectual plane. And finally, at our spiritual determination level, these 2 things happen. Failure to reach firm ground and slipping away from the ground previously gained, they happen on a spiritual level. So all these 4 together, many times we may not detect directly in our life, right? But there is a way that to actually sense all these, even one of these or more of these, when they manifest in our life, they cause the following 4 effects. So let us see what those are. He says, Dukkha durmanasya angam ekajatva shwasa prashwasa vikshepa saha bhuvaha. So he says, dukkha. Dukkha here means distress, right? So, this is something, pain, distress is something that, we all can identify with. We may not know whether I'm lazy or not, but definitely I know when I'm in pain, when I'm going through distress, we all identify that, right? Now, broadly speaking, scriptures classify even this distress to be also of 3 kinds, right? The first kind is distress that we experience from our own, internal states, right? So that is one level where we bring upon distress to ourselves. Sometimes distress can also come due to other forms of life, some other people disturbing you, maybe some mosquitoes, bugs biting you, that is a distress coming from other people and other forms of life. Then there's a third form of distress that happens due to natural calamities, it's too hot or it's too cold, etc. So these are the kind of distress coming due to supernatural calamities and so on. So these are the kind of distress. So definitely we know, moment we go through distress, right, especially the internal distress, we need to understand that, look, I think I need to identify, one or more of those 9 categories of obstacles that Patanjali discussed in the previous sutra. The second one he says is durmanasya, or despair or depression. It's interesting how this durmanasya, depression, is described. The classical commentators, they explain that depression is a state of not getting what you want, when your desires are not fulfilled, or when what you expect, this is what is to happen, and when that does not happen, that is when we experience this depression or despair, right? So that is also one of the internal pointers that we can see. The moment you experience some form of despair or depression in your life, again, go back and see which of these 9 things. Is it maybe, maybe I'm too attached to something, right? When that avirati, when that sensuality comes, maybe I'm too obsessed with something, and when that is not fulfilled, is that why I'm becoming despondent, right? Or is it just that I have my own internal laziness, and when somebody disturbed my status quo of my laziness, and that is what is causing me some kind of inner despair, right? So there are multiple reasons that we can actually look upon, right? Then this is something again very practical. Angam ejayatva, which means that trembling of the body. Anga here means the body, and trembling. So which means sometimes during our asana practice, you will see when you're trying to hold a particular asana, your body starts to tremble, right? Of course, even in a normal day-to-day life also, if somebody is not taking care of their body really well, even while functioning their day-to-day activities, you'll see that their body starts to tremble, right? So that is also a result of one of the previous obstacles that we challenged, that we discussed, and that manifests again on a physical plane that way. And shwasa prashwasa, inhalation and exhalation, there is a fluctuation, there's a disturbance, vikshepa in that. So basically this, you can notice when you're trying to practice pranayama, you will notice that you're not able to hold your breath, or even while inhaling, the inhalation is not happening properly, or while exhaling is not happening properly. There's a fluctuation in the pace at which you want to, especially if you want to inhale slowly and exhale slowly, you will notice that you're not able to hold on to your breath for a long time. You're not able to regulate the flow of breath for a long time, right? And that is the situation of here, of what Patanjali is talking about here. So this, even when somebody is internally also very disturbed, you will see they will end up having very shallow breaths, right? So shallow breathing also is a symptom of mental distraction. So all of this, right, these are all accompany distress, depression, trembling of your body, and disturbed breath. All of these, they accompany your mental distractions, your chitta vikshepas that we spoke about in the previous sutra. So this is a very exhaustive list, like an internal checklist that, we can apply we can use for ourselves to see, which of these are manifesting, right? Of course, the rest of the book helps us to overcome. And this is the beauty of books like Yoga Sutras, is that they're not giving a point-to-point solution. Okay, for this, for distracted breath, do this. For laziness, do this. For overcoming your doubts, do this. It's not like a point-to-point solution like what a dictionary would offer. Rather, Patanjali is going to take us through a journey later on in the book where we are working on our whole lifestyle aspect itself, right? Even to begin with, just developing some level of mode of goodness or sattva will help in actually regulating many of these aspects, right? Many of these chitta vikshepas. Of course, we already saw in the previous section that there can be nothing more deeper and profound than Ishvara Pranidhana. The devotion to Ishvara actually helps in overcoming not just one, but all of these challenges, right? And beyond, of course, there's Ishvara Pranidhana as one technique, developing a sattvic lifestyle as one technique, right? And also later on in the book, Patanjali is going to talk about various yogic practices, starting from yamas, niyamas, going on till asana, pranayam, pratyahar, also aiming towards helping one overcome these internal disturbances. But the point is that we need to identify that there can be some internal challenges, internal obstacles that we all carry, right? To identify the problem is at least half the problem solved, right? So then we are aware, oh, these are the challenges that I have. These are the situations that are triggering those challenges, right? So rather than just being tossed around in the waves of these internal challenges, at least being cognizant of, aware of these internal challenges actually will help us to address them with our practice over a period of time. All right. Of course, he's not going to leave us hooked like this on a cliffhanger for a long time. In the very next sutra, sutra number 32, Patanjali is going to give us a very important sutra. In general, how do I overcome these challenges? And after that, he's also going to list a series of practices that one can do in order to overcome these obstacles. Right? So stay tuned for more of these sessions. So see you all in our next session. Hare Krishna.